Welcome to episode 1 of This Catholic Life. This is a podcast where we have conversations about life's ups and downs, big and small, how we deal with every situation imaginable, whatever life throws at us, and still manage to be sensible, practical, and joyful. Today's show is going to be appropriately named New in Town, as we are in fact new. I'm your host, Peter Holmes. I'm joined today by Renee, Kohler Rian, and Ryan Galliott, or as we both know him, and we're going to have trouble not calling him Box because that's been his nickname for some time.
That's how most people know me.
You have to tell us why. Why Box? I've known you as Box for donkey's years. But
Yeah, for years. Look, honestly, it started with ministry. I was involved in a lot of youth ministry when I was younger, and my Filipino name is Galliott.
Oh, there you go.
So I had a lot of people saying, hey, we're going to call you Bazza. And I said, no, not Bazza. So it was shortened to Box.
Bazza, yeah, okay,
Box.
Good choice.
Yeah, it was a good choice, I think. It was a good trade-off.
So what, it was
Galliott. So it's Tokyo with a B in front.
Right. So what does it mean?
Apparently, one of the dialects in Philippines, it means crazy one.
We picked well.
Is it?
Yeah, well, it translates well, Box. Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can't put you in a box, but it's worth saying a little bit about who we are. I'm Peter Holmes, as I said. I lecture in scripture and in ancient languages and marriage and sexuality at Notre Dame. Renee is a professor in philosophy at Notre Dame. I forgot to mention that Ryan's an artist and has many things.
Struggling artist. Yes.
It kind of sounds like the beginning of a joke, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The theologian, the philosopher, and the artist walked into a bar.
Anything
Catholic.
Any occupation you can think of that doesn't earn money, that's what I do.
So, moving into why? I mean, we've come here. Why are we doing this podcast? What's going on with this podcast? Why would we bother recording a conversation about life, the universe, and everything? Most people get on with this in their normal lives. So why are we doing this podcast? God.
Why are we doing this podcast, Peter?
Excellent question, Renee. Why are we doing this podcast? Because we wanted to have an extended conversation. Thinking about life, the universe, and everything is an essential element of living life. Right. And living life well. So we wanted to have that conversation, and podcasts are one way in which people in the modern world are having extended conversations, not just with each other, but with their audience. And we want to engage the audience. We want to hear from you guys about this, but we're going to start the discussion, if you like, and prompt you to respond to us through various ways. I want to begin by congratulating the people who put together this studio, the equipment for the podcast, and particularly our producer Mike for the hard work that's gone into this so far. I know personally we've been going back and forth on this for some time. It's been almost a year now since we started sort of...
It's been a long time, and we're finally here.
And you hear the voice of Mike there. He'll be pulling us back into line when we get out of...
Control.
Out of control. We're designed to be a series of conversations about daily life, but we're also going to have a lot of fun doing it, because life should be fun. It should be joyful. And joyful is not just being giggly or happy. It means actually finding meaning in what we do. So we're going to muddle through everyday life with you guys as we talk this through. So let's start with ordinary life. What have you been up to this week, Renee?
What haven't I been up to? That's the real question,
Peter.
Peter.
Packed.
It has been packed. So last weekend it was great because one of our sons was confirmed.
Oh, wow.
And that was just so joyful. So he's generally a little bit reserved, but you could just see the Holy Spirit made some kind of powerful impact there because he was giggly and joyful.
So
really joyful.
Let's not assume that our whole audience understands. We're confirmed as, a card-carrying Richmond supporter? Or?
Yeah, I forget that confirmation means lots of different things. So confirmation for Catholics is basically, as I said to my son when it was all said and done, I said, now you have confirmed that you are a Catholic. You have renewed your baptismal vows. You've gone through all of the sacraments of initiation. So you've been baptized, you've received First Communion, and now you're confirmed. And I can see the theologian to my left nodding at this. So the philosopher has gotten it right, which isn't always the case.
It happens occasionally, yeah.
It does happen occasionally, yeah. So, that was wonderful. Had family in town. I've been teased mercilessly for going into a state of panic and baking 8 lasagnas a couple of weeks ago because I thought, how are we going to do this?
Is this the way you normally deal with panic?
Yeah, exactly.
Lasagnas?
I bake.
So
no, just bake. It doesn't matter what it is. You just bake.
So this was an 8 lasagna panic. So is that the measure?
Yeah, that's right. That's
that
right.
a measurement?
Well, and then I had to bake a cake on top of that because, you got to bake.
Right.
No, it's been a pattern in my life. Baking, just take care of things. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
The husbands are saying,
Unlike
well,
philosophy, which
it's
is endless.
It's 8 lasagnas and a cake. It's serious. Something's happening.
Basically. And of course, we didn't eat all of them because we had everyone brought things and it was just wonderful. So now, which is a very Catholic way of celebrating any sacrament, it's just this sort of overabundance of everything,
Bring
including
it
lasagnas
on.
in this case.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was last weekend. And then this week, we've had various things going on, from our youngest being ill to our oldest stating in the middle of the week that, oh my gosh, she had to be at rehearsals 2 nights in a row because she'd signed up for a showcase at her new high school, and we had no idea what a showcase was. So I was racing home, and then my husband was like tearing around taking kids everywhere, and we're always wondering if our car, which is about to die, was actually going to do it, on one of these runs. And then in the midst of all of that was some fairly serious business, in that I was helping to teach the bioethics program over at the medical school, which meant that we were dealing with huge life issues. So it was beginning of life issues, embryonic research, and everything that goes on with maternal health care, and then we ended up talking about transhumanism at the end as a kind of end point to it all.
In the
So
middle
it's
of all
great.
that, do you ever wonder, like you're talking about transhumanism and an end and beginning of life ethics, and then you come home and you're looking at your car going, you're not allowed to die. I have other things to worry about. I have other things to worry about. This is not happening.
Yes, I do.
Well, I had some car troubles of my own. My son managed to get in an altercation with another car and came off second best. So we're trying to replace a car. And I have to say that the insurance that I pay to have peace of mind actually gave me more trouble than the actual accident itself. So still an ongoing thing, and I won't mention any names yet. You're on notice, insurance company. Box, what have you been up to?
Well, I've spent the last parts of the last week showing around some relatives who've now gone back to the Philippines. But it's funny
You scared
because
them off?
Yeah, I think so. No, it's funny because in the Philippines we have these bicycles with sidecars called pedicabs, or motorbikes with sidecars called tricycles. And usually, if you're going for a walk that's further
So
than
you call them motorbikes tricycles?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. But pedicabs usually, if you want to walk somewhere maybe up the block or a couple of blocks away, you take a pedicab. You just don't have to walk.
Okay.
If you're going further than that, you might catch a tricycle.
Right.
And so they're not used to doing a lot of walking. You come to Australia, to Sydney, and I'm showing them around, and anything longer than a 5-minute walk is a long walk.
Right.
So
And so they're trying to hail a cab?
yeah. Well, no. They'd
Until they
ask
find
me,
out it's
how far is this?
$25.
From the station, it's about 3 blocks away. 3 blocks. Can we take a break? So it was an interesting experience. I think we
kind of assume that in the city we're the unfit ones, right?
Yeah. And I forget constantly just how much more exercise I get.
Yeah.
Living here
Although
than when
it sounds like some of the guys in the Philippines where they pedal a lot, so they're the fit
they're
ones.
the fit ones. That's right. So it was an experience just showing around because these are more older folk.
Yep.
And just having to relearn and remember.
Yeah.
How to show them around without exhausting.
Yeah.
Everyone's patience.
Indeed. Since this is the first podcast, our topic is new in town. Now, we wanted to spread that topic out a little bit and talk about all the ways we can be new to something. Now, obviously, this is a new podcast, so our experience this morning has been checking out the place, finding out the cool studio. It's still got that new car feel to it, the smell.
Yep.
But there's other ways we can be new. All of us, I think, were you born and raised? You weren't born in Sydney, were you?
No, I was born in the Philippines.
So
yeah.
Box was born in the Philippines. Renee doesn't come from Sydney originally.
No.
So
I do
where did you
not.
come from originally?
I come from the town of Yarrawonga in Victoria.
Yarrawonga?
So in northeast Victoria.
Northeast Victoria.
Yep.
What would be the nearest big town around there?
Yarrawonga. Well, it's interesting
Let's
because
discuss your definition of big.
That's right. A lot of people know Albury. New
Yes,
South
yes.
Welsh people tend to know Albury. We're about an hour away from there,
Right,
but also
okay.
about an hour away from Shepparton. So yeah,
One of my
those would be the
uncles
bigger
was in
centres.
Shepparton.
Okay.
Actually in a place called Naringaringaringalup. Catamatite is another.
Well, our family lives on the Catamatite Road.
Whenever I
Yeah.
say that name, people think I'm taking the mickey out of them.
Yeah, Catamatite. I know, Yarrawonga.
I was
Catamatite.
born in a town called Traralgon,
Oh, yeah, that's a hard one. You have to get all the R's in the right
except
place.
that most people just got, being Aussies, Traralgon.
Yeah.
Traralgon. Actually, I lived in Gormandale, which is southeast Victoria, and there was 10 houses in the town, and we were another 7 kilometres up into the bush from there. near Bulga Park, which is one of the national parks down the bottom, and about maybe 45 minutes from the southernmost tip of Australia. So it was quite a country area, very cold. New in town, though, that means we all came here. So why don't we talk about coming to Sydney as part of our first newness? So when did you arrive?
I arrived when I was 6, so it would have been, 1988?
You're giving away too much.
Yeah,
Bob.
spring
Yes,
chicken. You're making me feel old.
Oh my god!
It's good to have a range of ages. That's the reason. Yes, on the panel.
No, it's good because I look a lot younger than I actually am as well. So I get that
Eternal
different generation. Yeah,
You can
different
fit in
people.
anywhere.
Yeah, oh,
You'd
thank
be a
you.
great spy. Yeah.
Well, you do. You have friends of various ages. My son is actually counts you as one of his good friends. So
awesome.
That's a treat. He doesn't make friends easily, so that's a good thing.
I'll try to be a good influence.
No comment. He's 21. He doesn't. Yeah, I'm not
Doesn't
sure
know
what
any
kind
better.
of influences he needs at this age. So, do you remember coming to Sydney?
Vaguely, because we'd lived in Africa for a little
Wow.
while before that. So I
So,
spent.
sorry, hang on. Philippines.
So I lived in Philippines until I was 4.
Yeah.
Then we moved to Africa.
Of course, why not?
Yeah, why not? My stepdad at the time was working as a civil engineer.
Ah,
so
there you go.
We lived in a compound in Somalia.
Wow.
Yeah. So from there we moved back to the Philippines for a little while, and then to Sydney when I was
Right.
6. Yeah.
So you've had quite a lot of experience of being new into literally not just a town but a country. So
Yeah.
What would you say is the experience that really stands out for you in that experience?
Really, the colloquialisms.
Yep.
And the little things. I see it with a lot of Filipinos that are new to Australia now and trying to. We tend to be a quieter culture.
Okay.
In some ways, and so I come off as really in your face and obnoxious, and I speak to my Australian friends, and they tell me, "Oh, you're very quiet."
Yeah.
And,
Right, yes.
I
and
would've
so
said
it's an
that.
interesting thing, and it's just something I remember struggling in kindergarten and primary school, just trying to understand the culture in that way before I felt confident enough to really step in. Yeah.
Would you say your accent's changed significantly?
Oh, yeah. It's funny because I still pronounce a lot of my R's and other letters.
Yeah.
And so Australians say I don't sound Australian, but Filipinos say that I sound Australian. So
The R is actually one of my things is I teach language, and the R is one of the hardest things to get Aussies to say. So
That's right,
there's some words that you have to say on, otherwise they mean something completely different. And getting Aussies to say it, you have to say sound Irish or go American or something, because we just don't have it.
well, at the same time, I've been on a lot of trips overseas for pilgrimages and World Youth Day, and I find those are the times that a lot of us immigrants that have come into Australia and then gone out on these trips, we tend to really become ochre. With oh yeah, how you doing, it
funny,
just comes out, yeah.
But is that an accent? I mean, do we hear that in Sydney streets? Because
I mean, I don't hear it too often.
no,
but
and yet we have it somewhere. It's
yeah,
like a
it's
primal
locked
thing.
in there.
That's right.
It's
That's right.
the Aussiness.
Well, Renee's been to very different places. So where have you been?
So at 17, I went to the United States.
Right.
And I did an undergraduate degree over there.
In saying ours?
In ours, yeah. In fact, every time I came back, every year I came back, my dad would say to me, "This is good. You're here for a few months, rehabilitation time. We're going to knock those R's out of you, pretty much." So that was for 4 years. I had the privilege of being over in the United States. I was at a liberal arts college that had a Rome program, so I actually lived for 3 months in Rome,
Oh, wow.
which was just
really
life-changing. It was amazing.
Yes.
And then I went and did my master's in Belgium in philosophy
Okay.
and my PhD. So I ended up spending 13 years in Belgium because while I was
Wow.
there, got married, had 3 kids. When we moved back to Australia, to Sydney, I've been to Sydney really briefly when I was a teenager. When we moved to Sydney for the job at Notre Dame, I'd been away for 17 years. So I left when I was 17, came back 17 years later. So now the balance is firmly within Australia's
I was
court.
going to say congratulations on keeping your accent, because that
Yeah.
is a solid time away.
Speaking of that, though, it comes and goes.
Right,
So sometimes if I'm really tired or if I'm in a very stressful academic situation, it's like all of my training of trying to help people to understand what I was saying back when I was in graduate school comes to the fore. And all the I's come out and
Yeah.
people say, "What are you, like, you don't sound like
Do you
yourself."
find that it depends on what you're talking about, because I've talked to some other colleagues who've moved around, and I find that when I'm talking to someone about the topic they studied in Ireland, or in the US, their accent from that place will come out.
Come back.
It's funny, isn't it? All those associations.
Yeah, and it's funny. I could not understand myself in a recording of myself when I was 8. I recently heard a recording of myself because I had such a country Victoria accent.
Yeah.
And when I call up some old mates occasionally, I have to stop and realign my head just to get into that accent.
Yeah.
And yet it's there. Now I can throw it out there. Hopefully not on this podcast too much. What was your experience of coming to Sydney, Renee? What was the overwhelming sort of takeout?
Well, actually, it has very much to do with language, because I could not understand a lot of people when I came here.
Oh, wow.
And it's not because of the Australian accent. So
was it idioms or?
No, it was because Sydney is actually a really culturally diverse place. And I'd become very used to being in fairly, I don't know, when I was in America, it was all Americans. When I was in Belgium, it was all Belgians.
Yeah.
And if they spoke in English, there were particular idioms. And now, I was just at my daughter's school last night, and I came home and I said to my husband, oh my gosh, I think she's only the only blonde possibly in the school. And I actually asked her the next day, and she said, no, there is one other. And I thought, oh, okay. So we had people from the islands there. We had
what a turn up in Australia to say, she's the blonde one. And you could recognise her in the school.
That's right. You could probably spot her. So a couple of funny stories, actually. So one, when we first arrived, we didn't have a washing machine. And so we had a really small family, and we didn't have anything in the house. We had no fridge, we had no washing machine. My husband, we knew he was going to have to go to New Zealand to get his permanent residency visa fixed up. That was all very complicated and bureaucratic.
That's a really strange thing, isn't it, the way Australia works?
Gosh, anyway, that was nightmarish. We didn't have a car. We were waiting for all of our stuff to come over from Belgium.
Sorry, Renee. The reason you didn't have a car in Australia is that they're cars.
Yeah, I know, car. We didn't have a car, Peter.
Go on.
And we certainly did not have a washing machine. So, and all this laundry for these kids who are in nappies. And anyway, so one day we thought, well, what are we going to do? We're sitting around in an empty house with a phone, and my husband said, well, I'm just going to call around. So he called this, laundromat, and he said, could you just tell me, is your laundromat somewhere where we deliver the clothes and you wash them when we take them away, or do we stay there and wash them? And the response was, I call police, go away. And he said, I just don't think that we'll be going there, Renee. And I said, okay, that's fine, but what do we do now? So we ended up finding somewhere else. But even I remember being somewhere and calling to find out some information about the place that we were staying while we were looking for a place to live, and just turning to my husband and saying, I have no idea. I don't even know what accent I'm dealing with here. I'm in Australia. I'm Australian. What is going on? So it was this kind of panicked moment of cultural...
Some of that, I grew up in the country, so it was very homogenous and very much the same across the board. And occasionally, there were a lot of Aboriginal people around us, and there were a lot of, once we got to university, there were a lot of Asians coming through, and it was still very distinct.
Yeah.
They're great people, and I had lots of friends amongst them, but there was very distinct accents.
Yeah.
And what I found in Melbourne is that it tended to blend a bit more. Like people tended to hang out and sort of blend the accent. It got really weird because you'd have people picking up the Somalian and you'd pick up the Vietnamese idioms in a workplace. Whereas in Sydney, there still seems to be segments of the community that strongly sort of keep the accent in that particular area. And I can tell you which kids my kids have been playing with at school when they come home and tell me, today was fully sick. Okay, I know who you were hanging out with today. And that's fine. It's just that it's really interesting that it's so strongly preserved in very different areas.
It's funny you say that because I find that it's who you talk to as well, not just topics of conversation. I know my cousins that were born here in Australia, raised in Australia, have Australian accents, slightly Americanized. But when I got used to when I was talking to them and they were kids, when you grow up, and just switching to this Filipino accent because that's how their parents, my aunties spoke to them in that.
That happens, and you'll get this, when you open your mouth and your father comes out. That is, and you can even hear the accent. You go, oh my God, I've turned into my father. I swore this would never happen. And now I'm sort of rebelling and I'm in that sort of middle age going, I'm just going to go with this. Grumpy old man, here I come. In terms of New in Town, though, that was your experience with Sydney.
Yeah.
Mine was that when I arrived in Sydney, I think I had a plane ticket, and I flew in, and I had 2 days to find a house, and then I was going to fly back and then bring the family up about 2 weeks later. So I made about 100 calls to Sydney, different real estate agents, and that's a fairly broad spectrum of the accents. Landed in Sydney, had hired a car, and it hadn't occurred to me to get an automatic, because I drive manuals, it doesn't really bother me. But they gave me this little thing, one of those cars that's barely a strip of metal around you, and it was a manual. And I had back then we didn't have the iPhone sort of directions thing, so I had a Sidway open on my lap, which is a massive, A4 size book, open on my lap, changing gears and driving. And those 3 days when I first came to Sydney was one of those torrential summer rain days. All 3 days, just absolutely pouring down. And I was squinting through it. Poor little windscreen wipers could barely see it. I was moving my head with the windscreen wipers to try and look through them. And I saw, I think, I drove past about 30 houses, and I saw inside of 10 that day, over those 2 days, and put in an application for a couple, got back to Melbourne. And they said, and a couple of real estate agents rang me and said, would you like the house? And I couldn't remember which one was which. And so I just said yes to one. And we got there, and my wife's saying things like, well, how big is the house? What's the measurements? I don't remember anything. Please don't hurt me.
I don't want to remember it.
And my wife has architectural training, so she literally has mapped out to the last centimetre where every piece of furniture is going whenever we move.
Oh, wow.
And she was very frustrated. So we arrived, and I started work, I think, within like 4 days of getting here, and I was already, my job at that stage was to drive all over Sydney, so I got to know it very well. I remember the rules being, one of my best friends told me at the time, the first rule of Sydney traffic is never drive on Parramatta Road. The second rule of traffic is back streets are your friend. The third rule is never drive on Parramatta Road. The fourth rule, there is no fourth rule, and the fifth is don't drive on Parramatta Road. And I laughed about it at the time, until I got onto Parramatta Road, and it's just mayhem, and they haven't improved it. Although it would be really interesting when the tunnel that's going up just under, where does it come up? It comes up just before Lewisham.
I think that's right.
Somewhere just in the suburb
Around
before
that
Lewisham
area,
there. It'd be interesting to see what that does to it. What I noticed though is that Sydney has an attitude that's a bit different to the rest of the country. I've lived in all kinds of places in the country, but I lived in Adelaide for a while, and Adelaide thought there was this big rivalry thing happening with Melbourne, right? Yeah. It's us versus Melbourne. Because Melbourne took the Grand Prix, and it was a big rivalry back then. And Melbourne didn't care.
Yeah.
Right? Melbourne thinks it has a big rivalry with Sydney, and I have to say,
Sydney
just doesn't care.
No, that's right. That's right.
And Sydney has this attitude, and the best way I've heard it described is Paul Keating came out once with, if you're not living in Sydney, you're camping out. There's kind of the outskirts of Sydney, and then there's the outback, and what parts of the outback are called Melbourne and Perth and Adelaide and Darwin, but generally it's the outback, and pretty much civilization. I've spoken to many people in Sydney, and they're getting desperate about house prices, and they'll say, we've just got to move out of Sydney, and there's this terrified look in their eyes as they look at, but where? And for them it's the same as whether in Timbuktu or Melbourne. One of the other experiences about being new in town is not just about countries or places, it's about a job. So when you start at a new job, the job's most of your life. So you're spending all this time on a new desk or whatever with new colleagues. So when you've jumped out around a few different occupations.
Yeah, a few different jobs. I've been very blessed in that field because I found that a lot of times I've gotten jobs through connections.
Right.
And so I already had a familiarity. It was just familiarizing myself with the mechanics of the job. So I've been very lucky there. But learning how to get along with the same friends in a different frame of mind.
Yeah.
That's
just because you know them doesn't mean it's automatically going to work.
That's right. And I had to learn very quickly how to separate professional relationship from that personal relationship. I think that's probably the thing that a lot of my friends struggle with.
Right. In terms of dealing with you?
Myself. And they come to me a lot about talking about, the jobs they have or where their struggles are. And I have to constantly remind, just gently that, hey, is this in the capacity of your boss?
Yeah, which hat am I wearing today?
Yeah. It's a difficult thing to discern sometimes.
And to be honest, even though you're wearing different hats, you're still the same person.
Yeah.
But advice comes from different angles depending on which hat you're wearing.
That's
So,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
And some people say, I don't want you to hear this in the capacity of this. No, you can't do that. I can give you advice from that capacity, but I can't not hear it as the person in charge of this.
Still that person.
So, Renee, in terms of jobs,
Yeah. So it's funny, if I can throw in a little philosophical concept here, Peter. I hope that's allowed. I know.
Absolutely.
I know.
Bring it on.
Okay, good. So when I talk to my students about moral philosophy, often one of the concepts I bring up is ethos, and the term ethics comes from ethos. And I think that different institutions, different countries, different cities, they have an ethos, and it has something to do with the way that everyone relates with each other and somehow with what they do. And that all feeds into what they believe. So Alistair McIntyre would talk about this a lot, but the different practices that we have tell us who we are. And I think that's really important to
Does
think
the
about
word
what it
ethnic
means to
come
be
from the
Catholic.
same base?
Yeah, I think it does.
So ethnic
I think so.
describes...
Don't hold me to that, because I haven't dealt with that part of it.
Ethnos, no, I think it is. Ethnos is the same word, and it literally means the
ethnicity.
culture of a place.
Yeah, or ethnos, ethos. Yeah, and it takes a while to kind of get the ethos. It's like the vibe of the place. So when I first started working at one university,
Yep.
which was over in Belgium, it was very different from when I came to Notre Dame.
Oh, I bet.
And Notre Dame has grown a lot since we've been there.
Actually, that's a good
Yeah, and so that means that the ethos changes as well. And then we have, I now have long-standing relationships with alumni. My children, it drives them
Alumni?
crazy.
What's an alumni?
Someone who has graduated from a place.
I was
So
gonna say, so
I
they're
have
not
one
made
to
of
my right
aluminium.
here. Yeah, Box is one of my favourite alumni. As I tell all of the alumni, you're all my favourite alumni, but you happen to be one of my favourite
We're
alumni.
all favourites.
That's right, you're all favourites in your own unique ways.
Yes,
Yeah.
very modern of you.
Yeah, that's right. So,
I don't. I have specific favourites.
Yeah, that's right. I'm more liberal with my favourites,
Right,
you
okay,
could say.
yeah.
Yeah. More Catholic, perhaps. I don't know. So I think that's been something that's been quite interesting to deal with in different places. So whether it's been waitressing, I remember once waitressing in two different places right next to each other.
Wow.
One place, it's a bit like the Sydney, Melbourne, or Sydney and the rest of the world thing. Like one place didn't really care that the other one existed. The other one was intensely furious
Yes.
that the one
Yep.
next door existed.
Yep.
So I had to somehow negotiate these relationships. I'd be sneaking in the back door at night to waitress in one and hoping the other wouldn't see me. And then to go from different universities and different neighbourhoods and different cities. Yeah.
I've worked in a huge number of different things. I think somebody mentioned in an article about 10 years ago that the average person will have 7 careers these days because that's just what happens. You don't tend to stay in the same thing for very long. But I did some work in a restaurant. When I was a young fellow, I did hay carting, which isn't really a job. It's just how to kill someone quite quickly.
What?
Well, have you done any hay carting?
Yes, but obviously I was doing a different kind of hay cutting. There
Well,
was no death
they said,
involved.
you're a young fella, you can get down the bottom and heave this bale of hay
Oh
up
yeah,
to the truck.
no. Our family doesn't believe in that kind of thing. You got machines for this kind of thing.
No, see, this tells...
I'm from a farm. You get machines. Yeah.
I was from a farm and they clearly thought we've got all these young guys
Wrong
around.
ethos. Wrong
Easy for them
ethos.
to use.
No, I think they honestly just said these guys are going to get into trouble. We'll just wreck their entire body,
Right.
making them lug hay around, and then they won't get up to any mischief during the holidays. I
Wear
made a
them
bit
out.
of money out of it, but gosh, it was hard work.
Yeah.
Leaving that aside, I've tried to avoid hard work most of my life since then.
I haven't noticed that, I must say. I haven't
In terms
noticed
of
you
physical
avoiding.
work,
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
yes, physical
okay.
work. So, yes, the desk was a good one for me. But
Yeah.
during I was a Lutheran seminarian for a while, 6 years, and during that time I worked in radio. Also as a library assistant, so I did a very different world. Library is shh, and radio is as loud as you can be in various ways.
Yeah.
And then I was a minister for a while, which is very different again because your relationships with everyone are very shaped by how you're the minister or you're the minister of the local parish. Or interesting story about when I went into a local Catholic church to pray, and the priest come up and he saw my collar and he said, would you like to do the reading? Yeah, I'd love to, but I'm Lutheran. Oh, right, you are then. So and okay, he let me sit. He was very generous, very generous. He said, oh, we have a lovely minister's fraternal around here. And I said, oh, really? I haven't seen you there. And he said, oh, I never go to those things. Excellent fellow, really beautiful. He was about 79, 80 when I met him. And he was one of those old priests who used to walk the neighbourhood. He'd just walk the neighbourhood every Saturday morning, and he knew all his parishioners, and much to their chagrin, because they'd be in the garden weeding and going, oh, crap, here comes Father. And he would go, oh, I haven't seen you in Mass for a while. And he knew them, and he sat up the front and he watched everyone like a hawk.
Quick, look busy.
Yeah, he was a great priest. They all loved him. And now, moving on, sorry, I then was in counselling for a while, people with long-term unemployment, marriage counselling, and then got into education. So I was teaching scripture for, gee whiz, that's a long time. It has been a long time. It's nearly 20 years now. Teaching languages, scripture, and then in that capacity I came to Sydney and worked in Sydney, eventually ending up at Notre Dame. I'm coming up to my 10-year anniversary there.
I know.
Good grief.
I get all of these records.
Yes,
you know?
of course.
Yeah.
That's a conversation for another time.
That's right.
But new jobs, I'd have to say it's about the people.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have all the fancy stuff, you can have all the fancy gear, you can have an amazing job, and if the people are obnoxious or if the people are hard to work with, it makes life unbearable. Whereas you can do a really crap job and you actually have good people around you, and it actually makes it worthwhile. Yeah. It's really good. You want to go to work because it's about community. And whenever I see those business slogans about basically, let's make more money, let's try and trick you with another slogan that's about making more money, I always think, no, if you get a good feel and people trust each other and they trust each other to have each other's back, then you're going to get good results, because people want to be good for their friends. They want to be the best version. They want to be respected by people they respect. And that's
so true. It's social capital rather than economic capital.
And and it's clear that you get better results when you're all invested in it.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, some of those companies, we should have a podcast on this, but there's a Mondragon Corporation where they actually all own part of the company, so they're all invested physically, financially, sorry. So moving from the jobs, what about, I mean, have either of you played in sports teams?
A long time ago.
Yeah.
High school.
A long time. How old are you in high school?
In high
We've been
school,
over that. We know how old he is.
If you can figure it out.
If we could do maths,
Yeah, no, I played rugby, believe it or not. And I was fullback.
Oh my
So we're
gosh.
talking league or union?
Would have been union.
Okay, yep. The world game. Yep.
And it was interesting having to go through that. And I was a very skinny guy.
Yes, but in union you can do that, and you can, if you're the fullback, you can run.
Yeah. Well, I did a couple of good tackles. That's probably all I did, actually. Count them. I did
1,
on
2.
2 fingers. No, I remember that was interesting. Just having to. I'm not a very sporty guy.
Yep.
And to be there with, I'm lovingly saying this with meatheads.
Yes.
It was interesting because I didn't connect with the culture.
Yep.
I didn't connect with the culture, and I found it difficult. Because of the.
I've heard a comedian describe rugby as, they say, why won't you play? He goes, well, we've only just learned, human beings have just gotten off our it's to stand up. I don't need some Neanderthal pushing me down every other day. It depends. If you're really not into it, if you don't get why you're doing it, then it's hard to justify why you're running around. We got a point. Yeah, congratulations.
That's right.
But
can someone explain to me what it means to get a try?
Yeah,
I'm just not a rugby person.
He got a try.
So a try. What was he trying?
It sounds like one of those trophies they give kids at the end of the year. Good on you for trying.
Look, all I knew is I had to tackle anyone with the ball running my way. I was small enough to get at people's knees and just tie them together. So that's
actually, in rugby, you're allowed to do that. Yeah.
So
I played soccer and AFL. They don't like you taking out someone's knees in either of those sports.
Yeah.
So I played a bit, actually. I played competition table tennis, basketball, soccer, Aussie rules, not AFL. Aussie rules at a very low level, Aussie rules. And what else have I done? Laser skirmish. I was actually a backup for the Victorian laser skirmish team at one stage.
Never done that before.
Really fun stuff, really intense stuff, because it's basically in pitch black and you're going by ear and shooting people. Back then it was a different game, but it was really intense and full on. It was great fun. Except my Bugs night, everyone got sick of me. My friends didn't play as much as I did, so I would beat them when we played casually.
Yeah.
So on my Bucks night, they dressed me in a dinosaur costume. and gave me a gun and then made me run around the maze and they all shot me. They thought it was great fun.
It wasn't for you.
Well, especially wasn't because I ran headfirst into a wall and my glasses cut. You can't see it, but there's a great big scar under my right eyebrow and blood was pouring down because it's all strobe lights and all sorts of other stuff. Nobody could see that I was hurt, but I was lying on the ground bleeding and I actually have the record, like they give you a record of who shot you. They all came through and shot me at some stage while I was lying on the ground.
To quote Ian Holmes as Bilbo Baggins, it was a night to remember.
Yes. And we insisted on, I was not Catholic back then, we insisted on no alcohol at the Bucks night.
Right.
Still a good idea even if you're Catholic, but it was quite a wild. I shuddered to think what would have happened had we had a drink. So... Speaking of not being Catholic, I became Catholic. So that was a whole new experience of becoming Catholic. Now, were you guys born Catholics?
Yes.
You're not so sure about this.
Interesting.
Well, I was born into a Catholic family, and
Right, okay.
as many people can attest, a lot of my Catholic friends, it's something that it's sort of your parents' faith.
Right.
And I went because my family did, and it wasn't until after high school when I actually had to decide for myself.
Yep, sure. For the confirmation thing.
Yeah, well, and I had a confirmation before. I remember going up to Bishop Crimmin,
Right.
long after my actual confirmation, and said, "Hey, Bishop, I didn't pick a saint's name when I became confirmed." "Oh, that's okay. You don't need to." I said, "No. I'm serious about it now, and I think I know a saint."
Right.
So the bishop said to me, "Okay, who are you thinking?" I said, "Well, I can't decide between John the Baptist or Paul the Apostle, both of who are evangelists." Said,
Right.
"Go ahead." He said, "Well, John Paul." And he slapped me in the face and said, "Done." So, I don't have it on any paperwork, but apparently my name now is John Paul.
There you go.
That's fantastic.
So, Renee, how did you choose your confirmation saint?
Oh, actually, that's a pretty good story. I chose my confirmation saint because I thought he was awesome. And I had to fight my parish priest to have him as my confirmation saint.
Because it was a him? Or?
Because it was a him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he was just throwing all of these women saints at me. And I was like, no, Thomas More. It's just Thomas More. That's the one.
Tell us
I
why
want
Thomas More.
Thomas More was, in his own way, quite radical. So we all know the Thomas More who you see in the Holbein portrait and
Well, let's
Thomas
assume
More
we
Hillsman.
haven't seen that.
All right, so he's sitting there with his big chancellor's robes on because he was the second most powerful man in England, and he got into a row with Henry VIII, basically about papal supremacy, but also really about marriage. And to me, Thomas More is the man who refused to be on record or even just to tell a lie about what was actually true concerning the king and his wife.
But
So that's
we
sort
should
of
say
the
that
fundamental
before
thing.
that he had established himself almost universally in England as being absolutely fair, even to his enemies. He was absolutely fair. Even when his enemies were going to get away with something, he refused to bend the law to get them anything. He was he had a man of integrity. Everyone trusted him, etc. So,
and a real family man. What's often not known about Thomas More is that he educated his daughters to a really, really rigorous level. So one of his best friends, Erasmus, was a great scholar of the time, and he claimed that Margaret More, who became Margaret Roper, could outdo him in languages.
Wow.
I thought that was pretty impressive. And Henry VIII was so taken with what Thomas More was doing with his daughter Margaret in terms of education that he actually educated Elizabeth. So the Queen Elizabeth I we know of had the same academic program as Margaret More Roper.
Yeah.
So I found all of that really impressive. But there was just something about his honesty, his integrity, and his sense of humour.
That is important, isn't it?
Yeah, and he had this huge household, so he had a very magnanimous sense of family. He had his immediate family, but then his extended family. He was always kind of bringing in strays, and he had lots of pets. So, and one of his favourite things was to bring home a new exotic pet, including a monkey, and so all of this. So just a lot of fun and lots of joking around, practical jokes, academic jokes, which is always really fun.
Who's the priest? There's a priest saint who is
who died at the same time as him?
No. Is it Phillip Neri, the guy who is a clown basically, and anyone who was trying to be quite serious about their faith, he would stand on his head or do
Yeah,
something
that's
stupid.
right.
I did not know that.
Phillip
Yeah.
Neri, is it?
Yeah, you were telling me this the other day. I think,
I'll have to look
so
that one up and,
yeah.
and put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But there's a priest who, when he thought a particular seminarian was being too serious about his faith, he stood on his head until the guy laughed
Yeah.
at him.
Laughter is very important.
It's a huge part of Catholic life, I
Yeah.
think. And to be
And-
able to laugh at
Yeah.
yourself to start with,
Yeah.
and then at the world, the absurdity of it, etc.,
Yeah.
is a really important part of being joyful. I think.
Yeah, that's right. It comes right back to being joyful. Yeah.
So in terms of the patron saints, my story is that I became a Catholic at 30, and they told me you've got to have a saint, and I had, because I was baptised as a Lutheran at 20, and so I didn't have a saint, and I was thinking around, and I actually researched a whole bunch of things because I'm sort of like that, and I came across this saint who I admired so much because he was a teacher. He was a lecturer. He was so brilliant at many things. In fact, he's regarded as the last polymath, which means he was the master of many disciplines. In fact, I think he had read every book published because they were all handwritten back in those days.
It was easier.
It was much easier because there were less of them, and nowadays they'll publish anything on the internet. But basically, he'd read every book on the subjects that he had. He was a master level, at least, of all academic disciplines, including two that don't exist anymore. And some of his books in botany are still the cutting edge text in that area. But this was in the, I think, is it 1100s or 1200s? Albert the Great.
1200s.
There you go.
He
1200s.
taught Thomas Aquinas.
He did, and that's the key, because Thomas Aquinas was one of his slower students who plodded through the work, and everyone else called him the dumb ox because he was slow. And Albert had the insight to realise, I might be called Albert the Great in my own lifetime. This guy is going to shake the world.
Well, he said that, just wait, this ox is going to roar.
Yeah.
To when they were making fun of him. Yeah.
Yeah, you call him the dumb ox, and I say
Or
this
he'll
ox
bellow, I
will
suppose.
bellow,
That's
and
right,
his roar
bellow.
will shake the world.
Yeah.
Now, and after Thomas died of a very early age, Albert dropped his own work and committed himself to defending Thomas's
right.
work. And I admire that so much in him, that he wasn't interested in his own greatness, even though in his own lifetime he was recognised. He committed himself to the greatness of his students,
Yeah.
which is kind of an inspiring thing for me. But the freaky thing for me is when I told the bishop who my patron was, he said, "Oh, of course, because of your birthday." I went, "What?"
Yeah.
He's my birth saint. So he's the guy. Whoa, okay, good.
Didn't he also have a nickname? Was it Boots?
I didn't know this one.
He
Tell me.
liked to
Boots.
just walk everywhere.
Really?
So,
Ah.
I mean, I can't remember if it's him actually, but so correct me if I'm wrong. But I think he was on his way. He was summoned for a.
That was
council.
Thomas Aquinas was.
was
Yeah.
that- yeah.
And he was hit on the head by a tree branch. And that's why he's buried in Toulouse now.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah.
But
Yeah.
is that the Boots reference, or you think that's
Yeah,
from Melbourne?
I don't know. I'll probably have to,
Look into that one a
have
little
to
bit.
relearn how
that
to
would
study.
be an awesome nickname for a saint. too.
But that goes back to all that walking around the city, though. We forget how much they walked in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
walking all the time. We tend to think of them as just staying in one spot and being really boring and staying in one spot.
Yep.
But actually, they were probably more cosmopolitan than
Yeah.
a lot of us are today.
That's an interesting point. We should do a podcast on that, on whether technology has actually made us more or less busy, and whether it's actually made us better at what we do.
Yeah, or even what busyness is.
Yeah,
It's
because we've got
strange.
machines that do what they used to spend weeks doing,
Yeah.
and now we're busier. How does
does
this
that work?
Yeah, we're just
Yeah.
sort of
Getting
cramming
used
more
to
stuff
new
in. Yeah.
technology. Yes.
Yeah.
So in terms of the new church, though, I wanted to talk about that a bit, because becoming a Catholic is a massive culture shift.
Yeah.
And I've had the experience of coming in from, because I was actually born and raised an evangelical, spent a little bit of time as a Pentecostal, that's the AOG sort of movement, about
What's
a year and a bit.
AOG? Assembly of God?
Assembly of God.
Okay,
So
yeah.
basically, it's like Hillsong, but in the country it's less slick. So it's kind of just the happy clappy sort of thing.
Yeah.
With my apologies to my relatives who are still in the AOGs.
We like happy and clappy.
We do like those in their appropriate context, and you can clap and you can hap. My sister actually still goes to Hillsong and loves it very much. I'm not so keen. I think it's still a flashback to my experiences in the AOGs back then, and then I spent some time as an atheist. My first year of uni, which is seems to be the appropriate place to be an atheist in my first year of uni, and then caught up with some Lutherans and spent 13 years as a Lutheran before I became Catholic. So I've had a broad experience of different church cultures, and there is a massive difference. And what I've noticed is, we talked about accents and language before, you can say the same words, exactly the same words, and people will think you're saying the same things, but they're not. Like, so there's a document that Lutherans and Catholics agreed on justification. And when you read it, I'm thinking, my Lutheran hat on, I see what they're saying. The Catholic hat on, I can see what they're saying. They're not in agreement here. No. They're just saying the same word, and it includes a different meaning. Because where do we learn meaning? We learn meaning from
tradition, right?
Through practice.
I didn't say to my mum, "What's forgiveness?" and she sat me down and got the Oxford Dictionary out and showed me. You learn it from the experience. You learn it from your context, and it's just not the same. And what I found with Catholics is that they're like Sydney against the rest of the world, because if you're not Catholic, you're one of the other weirdos outside of there. And when you come in, that's all right. We like you to come in, but just you have to kind of find your own way. Like in Sydney traffic, you have to find your own way. Like in Protestant churches, everything's about the parish. You go to your local parish, the Bible study's there, the witness, the mission, everything's there. At least that was my experience of quite intense Protestant parishes. Then I became Catholic, and 2 minutes after Mass, and sometimes 2 minutes before Mass ends, everyone's gone.
Yeah.
And I'm checking my deodorant going, what did I do?
Tumbleweed.
Tumbleweed. The priest is blessing half the congregation that were there 10 minutes ago, and we're done, and everyone's gone because they're all off to other activities and other missions. And the Catholic world is so diverse. People are at St. Vincent de Paul, they're at Vinnie's, they're off to doing Legion of Mary, they're doing all kinds of things, just ordinary life. And it's much more organic in the way they express their faith. And they don't just give to one spot either. They give the time and everything to everyone. That's really hard to get used to when you don't know where those places are.
Yeah.
And if you're not involved in you feel really out of it, because nobody sits you down and goes, here's how you be Catholic. Because there's not one way to be Catholic. There's so many different ways. And when someone does tell you this is the way to be Catholic, watch out, because they're usually telling you a very restrictive version. Maybe I could ask you guys this question. Have you had an experience where you've come across something, even having grown up in Catholicism, you've come across something new and you've gone, what? This is in the Catholic Church?
Oh, gee. I'm going to have to think about that. I don't know. I remember my introduction to saints.
Okay.
I guess I'd chosen to be Catholic already for a few years, and I still had no idea what saints were.
Right.
And I remember being at World Youth Day and someone deciding, let's start a group prayer. So we did one, and then they said, maybe we'll just all offer up a saint and ask a saint to pray for us. And everyone started just going through the saints, and I guess I must have been visibly nervous, because the guy next to me said, are you okay? Do you know a saint? And I said, no. What are saints? And so, he quickly mentioned to me, maybe Thomas Aquinas.
Right.
And
okay.
I said, yeah. And then someone else mentioned Thomas. So I started getting really.
He stole mine.
I can't remember.
What am I going to do?
Yeah. I can't remember who I eventually went with. But I just remember thinking, wow, maybe I should look into this. And all these things that are attached to saints then became something really on the deep end. It made me very uncomfortable talking about incorruptibles, learning about them.
Yeah, the physicality of it's really weird.
Yeah, and relics.
When I was first a Catholic, one of the first months I was a Catholic, the relics of St. Teresa of Lisieux came to town, and our parish was one of the ones they visited. And I was given, the priest thought he was doing a great honour, and he was, but I didn't quite understand what was going on. He chose me amongst 3 other guys to be the porters of the massive, I don't know what it's called, but the reliquary.
Reliquary.
Of this relic of St. Teresa. Yeah. Sorry, what was that?
Should the O be in there or should it not be in there? I don't know.
Look,
I take it back.
I've been teasing you, but I'm actually a big fan of the R.
But we're just not sure whether we're just not sure if it belongs in that word or not. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No.
That was an R, not an R.
Yes, I noticed,
Okay.
but in Australia.
No.
So I was carrying this very, very heavy, because it was made of gold, reliquary, and coming from the Protestant perspective, there's all these things about Catholics. They get the gold and the indulgences and the saints and all this stuff, and you get this suspicion about it. And it didn't. This event didn't help. We were carrying this reliquary. It was so heavy, and they had lined the path with school children who were throwing petals into the air over us. And I found myself, and I'm a very cynical person about emotion, but I'm also an emotional person, and I found myself responding emotionally at the same time as my head was going, don't trust it, don't trust it. It was a really bizarre experience. As I'm carrying this thing and getting hit by rose petals, I didn't know the connection of the rose petals. We took her into the church, and I made some flippant comment, oh, gee, she's heavy. And I was looking at it thinking she's a small lady, because it's only a small reliquary. And the priest turned to me with all innocence and said, "Yeah, I think it's quite a sizable part of it. I think it's her arm." And from a Protestant perspective, I went, "Ew! Yuck! What are we doing with that? An arm? There's just no other place in the world I can think of where they carry around bits of someone's body and go, 'Yay, it's her arm!'" And I couldn't understand. I just couldn't get my head around it. So I sat and watched in the pew. I didn't approach after that. I watched people approach, and there was this queue that went, because this was the only place in the west side of Melbourne that people were coming. So there was a queue that went on for 2 days.
Wow.
And this queue just kept going, and I was watching all these people approach and the emotions and the response from their faces. I was trying to see what was going on, and I didn't get it until I jumped in the queue, and I walked through, and I inexplicably, and I've read this woman's writings, it didn't resonate with me. It did nothing for me. Now, it's a personal thing, but as I approached the actual relic, I was just overcome with the sense of occasion. The fact that this is a real person who we know is with Christ in heaven, and this is our connection with heaven. This is a physical connection with the reality. And that means me, this body, at some stage, please God, will be united with Christ in heaven as well. And that was it just hit me so hard. And it was almost like an excellent thought experiment, because I had no personal response to this person. I had no joy in their writings. It was just the physicality of it. And I remember we put rose petals to the reliquary and walked away and everything. It was just an incredible experience. Being new, and sorry, another funny thing that happened, some Carmelite nuns were coming in and selling merchandise, right? They came out of hiding. They're enclosed normally, and they normally just pray and pray. They come out with all these pictures of St. Teresa of Lisieux and all these paraphernalia. It was definitely their moment. And they were selling this stuff, and a friend of mine who was also a Protestant minister who just converted, about the same time as I did, was caught holding the door open for them as they came in and out with all their stuff. And he had this horrified look on his face. And I said, "Oh, you got caught there, David." And he said, "I keep telling them this is what started the Reformation."
Opening the door to Carmelites?
No, the nuns selling things that they shouldn't be. Okay. I'm saying it's not indulgences, David. It's not indulgences. He's now an ecumenical affairs officer in Melbourne. He's obviously a very joyful Catholic as well, and a lot of fun. So we've talked about new churches and about that. But what about other people who become new? Like, if we're on the inside and new people come, how do we make them welcome? I mean, it's not just in jobs and cities and other places. It's an overall thing. How do we make people welcome when they're new?
It's interesting you say that, because I've actually helping to lead a Bible study at the moment at my parish.
Right.
And one of the
this is a Catholic. Sorry.
Catholic.
Catholics read the Bible too, I'm told.
I'm told. Yes, there you go.
And it's one of the older gentlemen in my group. Well, not that old, but he just recently came back to the Catholic faith last year. He just started to learn about it, and talking to him, I realized that a lot of the ministry I've had before, talking to teenagers and young people, we forget that they're people.
Yes.
Not just
an
to
age
talk
category.
At them
Yeah.
and an age but to actually first and foremost invite them as people to be friends.
Yes.
And
to be themselves too.
Yeah, to be themselves. They don't have to put on a different hat.
You're
They
here
don't have to
now.
pretend
Here's
to
the
be this or
uniform.
that. Yeah. And to allow them to be themselves and know that they're accepted
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah. It's an interesting word you use there, acceptance, because there's a lot of talk about tolerance and acceptance, and you kind of, people confuse the idea of accepting a person with saying that everything they've ever done or will do is okay.
Yeah.
And so we can actually say we accept you as a person along with the rest of us who are learning to be the best version of ourselves, the full version of ourselves that we're created for. But it's not a rejection to say, well, actually, this is probably not doing you any favours. In fact, a really good friend will tell you that's not making you a good person. That's not helping you out. Yeah. I think we need to be careful, especially when people are new, though, that we don't jump straight to things that are quite hard to take.
That's right.
I was saying to one of my classes recently, think about how many people you would be comfortable with coming up to you and saying, let's have a talk about your sex life. Let's have a talk about something that's really deeply meaningful to you or your family. there's very few people I would tolerate that
right.
from. And why would then I expect someone else to tolerate me entering into that sphere in a conversation when I've just met them?
Yeah,
It needs to be, you need to have a friendship that can bear up to that.
That's right.
You need a relationship. And often that means practically convincing people that you care. And there's no way to fake it. There's no way to fake that. People know. So you have to actually care.
Yeah.
I think one of the more problematic things, and this isn't unique to Protestantism, but I saw it very prevalently when I was a Protestant, is that people would make friends with people so that they evangelized them. And when it became obvious the person didn't want to become a Catholic, they stopped making an attempt to be friends.
Flirt to convert kind of thing.
Oh, I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
No. Like
This must be something in younger circles.
Oh no, it's just something that.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe I just remember hearing it a lot when I was in ministry, and just people would use the term flirt to convert. You just become.
But that's a very much a romantic thing, is it?
Yeah,
like
I don't
using
know.
the pull of a
using
possible
the pull
romance.
and then try to convert that way, and it was just an interesting approach that I never really bought into myself.
You know, the number one reason that people become Catholic is they marry a Catholic.
Oh really?
As in terms of numbers.
Wow.
But
okay.
getting married is a bit different to flirting.
Yeah.
Married means you're serious about
Yeah,
serious about the person
Yeah,
themselves.
and it's
I would
not
hope
with
so.
the underlying.
We hope so.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. I just found it. I was uneasy with this thought that the underlying reason was to convert,
Right. Yes. Absolutely.
instead of
Yeah.
them as a person.
I just think that there's something with conversion that's so far beyond us as well.
right.
Like there can be this
Yeah.
real temptation to think, I'm going to convert as many people as I can.
Yes, right.
But actually, I think that as Catholics, my approach is you just try to live the best Catholic life you can and be open to questions.
Yes.
And then if someone comes and says, can you just tell me about this weird thing you did?
Yep.
Like, be the kind of person that someone could come up to you and
Yeah.
say, why do you do that strange thing with your knee when you walk into a church? Like, what's
wrong with your
up
knee?
with that? Yeah, and
You've
why
gotta
do you
stop
keep
kneeing
making
the holy
jokes?
water.
Yeah, I know. What is this water here? So that they can start asking questions, because
Yeah.
things that are quite natural
Yeah.
to cradle Catholics. I'm a cradle Catholic. So, I don't remember never having holy water or genuflecting
Yeah.
or knowing
I had this when I
stuff.
joined
Yeah.
the Lutherans, actually. I was dating my wife at the time. She wasn't my wife then, obviously, but I was dating her, and I refused to stand up when the Lutherans all stood up. And she was embarrassed because I was
Yeah.
in her pew when it was her home church. And I said, I'm not standing up until someone tells me why we're standing up.
Oh, dear.
And the trouble is that nobody knew in the and they had to get the pastor in to tell me what was going on. And that's how I got into theology. I
Yeah.
started to ask, why are we doing this?
Why?
Because the brethren are very anti-institutional, and now I'm a Catholic, so I'm almost the opposite of everything I was taught.
Yeah.
But the whole reasons for doing things, I had to have reasons, and I fought every single thing. And so every Catholic thing I can tell you that I do, I've thought about
You've
it
thought
and
about it.
actually said, do we really need to do this? And almost always the answer is yes. Sometimes it's not. It's just something that we've picked up along the way.
Yeah.
But most of the time it comes from something quite meaningful. How we actually implement it, though, we're coming back to that new person. If we gently encourage people to understand what the Eucharist is about, for example, or what's going on in a Mass, that's different to crash tackling them when they take communion and we think they're not worthy. It's just, it's not...
Yeah.
It doesn't even matter what the theology is at that point. You have demonstrated a lack of genuine love and care and the journey that person's on. So I think that's important. I don't like the word conversion.
Oh, come on.
I don't, because people talk about me as a convert because I've become a Catholic. Now, I didn't change religion.
Right.
I was raised a Christian. I was
yeah.
baptized 10 years before I became a Catholic, and I was raised a Christian long before that. I knew the Bible very well in terms of numbers of verses and everything before
Yeah.
I became a Catholic. And if anything, I call it a completion, because
Right.
it's rounded out all of the gaps that I had. Because 99% of what I had been teaching and was taught as a Lutheran is Catholic. 99% of it. There's some bits, the Pope's the Antichrist. We don't quite go with that as Catholics, but. I guess it depends what kind of Catholic you are. But let's just assume
Let's just stay away from that one.
The Pope is generally okay.
He's Catholic.
He is Catholic. The Pope is a Catholic. But I didn't change religion, and to be honest, there's a lot of people who conversion doesn't really apply because they were already. It's just one particular formal step on the journey. They've been coming a long way along the journey. So
Well, I mean, I came to understand conversion really as encountering Christ and then coming into a relationship with him. So
Sure.
when I chose it myself, it wasn't this one light switch moment that, this one moment changed my life forever. It was more this, the gradual, it's like people flicking small light switches along my life.
Sure.
And then you get to one point where suddenly it's a big light switch and I realize something. And it's every day is that relationship, that conversion experience where I'm...
But it's that either-or thing, isn't it? You're not either in or out.
Yeah.
It's like Jesus isn't going to say to someone, what you didn't formula, say, no soup for you. Sort of thing.
Good reference.
Sorry, Seinfeld. But the experience of being Catholic is to round it out, to complete it. That's at least from my perspective. It felt like I was in a very neat little room as a Lutheran, and everything was in orderly fashion, and all the theology seemed to be in order until you tested it, and there were holes all over the place. And then when I felt like it wasn't stepping into a bigger room as a Catholic, I felt like I was stepping out into a landscape where it was just wild and unruly and not ruled by, and it was chaos.
And we're not in control.
I knew most of the theology in the Lutheran Church. I'd read almost everything that was, to be read, and I became Catholic, and it was a horrifying moment when I realised I'm never going to read everything that's Catholic. I'm never going to understand anything, and people even joke now, one of the 3 things the Holy Spirit doesn't know is how many female religious orders there are. Because I keep coming out every year, I come across a new one and go, what? Where did you come from? What was your story? Anyway.
Yeah. Can I just add something about conversion there?
Yep.
So one of the thinkers I spend a lot of time with is Augustine. And what's always fascinated me about his understanding of conversion is we think, Augustine, he led a terrible life and then all of a sudden he converted and everything was A-okay. But his whole theory about conversion is that Christians constantly convert. So we go toward God, we mess up, sort of back a little bit, and then we have to come back again, and we have to come back again, and we have to come back again. And that's so as Catholics we have these sacraments that allow us to do that. So there is actually a definitive way in which you fall away and then you regroup and reassert your life in and with Christ.
Would you
I
say
think that's really important.
Augustine's journey begins when he starts questioning why he's doing stuff?
Yeah, and one of the most fascinating parts of the Confessions I find is that it's like when he's just about to convert, he feels like he's so far away from God, like he'll never make it. And about 5 minutes later, boom, he's there. Yeah. So the actual experience, it's what I was saying earlier. We don't convert people. No. It's actually God working in their lives, and we might be occasions.
Thing.
Yeah, and it's a lifelong.
I'm
thing.
still being converted. So the whole idea of being able to notch up a new, this one's mine. It's actually, firstly, we're not doing it. We walk onto this drama of life and we say a few lines and we walk off, and Christ does all the work, right?
Yeah.
But we're not converted just because we happen to have formally associated ourselves with the church. We're still being converted.
That's right.
There's still a lot of rough edges and some other lumps on me that need to be knocked off, and that'll be for the rest of my life. So evangelization happens all the time. That's right. I think in some respects there's been and I don't know, maybe this is from English Puritanism, or maybe it's just the fact that we kind of have this image of Holy Joe. We tend to look over the flaws of Christians until it's too late, and then they're really big flaws and they become a problem. We'll talk about that in some other podcast, but what about acknowledging the small ones, the hard bits, the big sort of struggle? Because when you were talking about suddenly you're there, I've had moments where I felt like I'm absolutely united with God and I feel really deeply in love with God and everything's great, and I wish I could grab this moment because the next week, where'd he go? Is there a God? It's really quite hard, because then you think, hang on, how did I get to that peak of sort of emotion? Was it just emotions, or was it actually, and the relation, it's like a relationship with a spouse or with a friend. It comes and goes, but a lot of it comes from hard work of actually putting in the time to talk and to listen and to talk and to listen. So
actually, going back to, being in the new in the church, it's one thing I found with a lot of young people, young adults especially, that were coming into the church. It was all emotional.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the big danger I found there, and something that I just kept my eye on, is when that emotion falls away, it's so easy for them to say, then am I not faithful?
Yeah.
Am I a bad... And so I have to tell them, no,
and
the emotions come with it, but...
That's
But
exactly
that's not
right,
it.
because you don't want them to go to the other way and
Yeah.
reject emotions completely.
That's right. So, the emotions come with the understanding of the love and joy we have.
Yes.
But, just like in any relationship, sometimes you're upset with someone.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that you don't love them.
No,
and
that's
I
right.
think
In fact, people who you love can upset you much worse than strangers.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yes, yes.
The people who are hardest to get along with are the ones that are really close to you. And you just, why can't you just stop doing that?
Yeah.
I love you so much. You'd just be perfect if you'd stop doing this one thing. Like, then I'd love you even more. Just stop it.
Just one?
Yes.
Maybe two?
It's funny because in the ministry we used to do a testimony sharing just our lives and how Christ has impacted our lives. And and I remember, I think as a deacon somewhere was asking me why I think that was the most impactful moment of a retreat, because we used to run retreats and reflection days. And I would tell them because it's us telling our not imperfect story, our imperfect story, and showing that we're imperfect, we keep trying, and we have our ups and downs, but we're still trying, and we have faith that...
That's true in a lot of cases. I mean, I remember I took heart, this sounds really counterintuitive, but I took heart in my academic life when someone told me they struggled to write.
Yeah.
And I went, yes, I'm not the only one. And yet it's still not something that people openly talk about because it's vulnerable, and we don't want to open up about that. And often people will look at somebody else and say, they've got it right, they know what they're doing, everything's fine. And if we can be a bit more raw and honest about our struggles, we could probably help them out. It's the time of the show when we wrap up the podcast, but before we do, we're going to have a segment called 1 Minute Wonder. 1 Minute Wonder is a segment where no matter what we've been talking about, we will actually talk about one thing. It has to be within 60 seconds. One thing that's made us wonder, be joyful, or just think, or reflect, or just in awe at God or His creation or something through this week. So, Box, I'll hit you up first. What's your 1 minute wonder for today?
I'm unapologetically a geek. I love sci-fi, fantasy, comic books, and it's been a really good time to be alive with the Marvel universe and all that happening in the cinemas. But I remember I love video games and having to defend the concept of story and mythology. And me being as slow as I am, I just finally encountered a video last week that summarized a conversation that happened between Tolkien and Lewis.
Wow.
About mythology. And Lewis saying, well, isn't mythology just a lie? Isn't it just, falsehood?
Wow.
And Tolkien comes in and says, well, no, we connect with the mythology because it points us to the true mythology.
Yes.
And how the divine mythology is what we're living now.
Right.
And just that, we talk about catharsis in the Greek
because normally
tragedy.
when people say myth,
Yeah.
They think they mean it's not true.
Yeah.
But actually it can be a way of telling the truth, which is much more profound.
That's right. And Tolkien points out how that's really something that came from materialism.
Yeah.
The understanding that it's only not true because we can't touch it, feel it, anything like that. So
is that empiricism?
Well, materialism, empiricism, it depends. We could have a long conversation about that, but probably not for this podcast.
No, not today. No.
So that's just been blowing my mind. I'm trying to really enter into that because it's what I talk about is popular culture. So.
Good on you.
Mythopoesis. Catholics are very good at mythopoesis. Yeah.
There you go.
A deeper wisdom within a seeming fiction.
What about you, Renee? What have you got?
Yesterday, we invited in a neurosurgeon to the bioethics program. And we were talking about transhumanism. So the idea was this was the last section we had on bioethics. What's going to happen in the future? And he came in and he talked about something that I had not really thought about, which is fractal geometry.
Okay.
Fractal geometry is that there are these really intricate patterns that repeat themselves in nature. And so he was showing us different images of trees and the way that tree branches form.
Okay,
and then he was showing us images of the human brain. And the same patterns were in the human brain.
Okay.
And then what he's doing with that, he's at Macquarie University, is actually amazing because what they're doing is that they're giving lots and lots of patterns or lots and lots of images to a particular program, which can then pick up tumours in brains more readily because it's able to read what's going on with it. Yeah, it reads the pattern. So it picks up more. So you'll never get rid of the human, the medical practitioner being able to read what's going on in a particular situation,
like
but it gives more information.
Wow.
And it's actually helping surgery to become more accurate because he was showing us how he put fluoride into a particular patient and that immediately showed all of the parts that weren't of the pattern. And so he could target the tumor more accurately.
Wow.
That was just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, for me, it was one of those humanities, I understand patterns and geometry. Oh my gosh, this is non-Euclidean geometry, and I started getting it. This is awesome. And I can see how it works. So that was my moment of wonder. Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. The verse, we are fearfully and wonderfully made, comes to mind at that point.
Yeah.
Mine is less academic than that.
I didn't think it was academic at all. Come on.
I'm actually... we were banned from listening to radio when I was a kid. Brethren were really against all this sort of modern music stuff, and I had to sneak away with a little radio I'd sort of stolen.
And now you have a radio podcast.
Indeed, because I noticed we're not playing any of that silly rock and roll. I got really into music once I got to about 16 because of that, and I went, but that was 86, so we're talking a little, late 80s, the peak of the 80s, which was absolutely amazing music style and vacuous lyrics. So which pretty much sums it up. It was hedonism at its peak, and then 90s got very cynical, and basically we've been nihilist ever since.
And boring.
And boring. It's so boring. I was telling my daughter, 2 men wrote half the top 50. Well, it might be the top 20, but 2 men have written the songs who are in half of the top 20. You go, it's because they've got a formula, it works, it sells, they go bang. And the reason I'm telling you 86 is that I was long past the era of the 60s, but when I saw the ad for Yesterday, the movie, just the short, for some reason it grabbed me, and I went, and because I'm a thinker, I just went, why is this grabbing me? I wasn't ever into the Beatles. And I listened to it, and the concept of the movie is that this guy is a freak of nature, of course. They magically happens that everyone else forgets the Beatles except one guy, and then he becomes known as the best songwriter because he's just repeating the songs. It's actually an idea from a British sitcom a long time ago, but it's really well done in the short at least, and I can't wait to see it. And I just couldn't figure out why. And then I realised there's something very simple. It's not complex. Simple about the composition of the Beatles. They grab you, and it taps into, well, they're one of the first bands to really tap into ordinary emotions, ordinary life, and be a little bit silly with their stuff. And so I've gotten right back into the Beatles.
Yeah.
I was never, and when I say back, I was never into them in the first place, but I'm watching, this is even more fascinating, I'm watching my kids' reactions, because their initial reaction was, 60s. And now, because I've consisted on playing it a few times, they're all gone. Getting into it and all the different emotions. It's really fun to see. Anyway, can't wait to see that. We might talk about it later if it's any good at all. That's it for this week's podcast. If today's discussions got you thinking, arguing, or upset with us, tell us. We actually want to hear from you. We genuinely want to hear from you. We're actually interested in talking about what you say, how you feedback. You can contact us directly on info@thiscatholiclife, one word, thiscatholiclife.com.au. You can subscribe to the podcast on our website, thiscatholiclife.com.au. And on that site, you'll find links to all the usual social media, Facebook, Discord, Twitter, all of the others. And we want to hear from you. So get on our Facebook page, get involved with the discussion. If you send us something, we'll talk about it. We better be careful saying that. We'll have a go at talking about it. We'd love to hear from you and get involved, because this is actually supposed to be about ordinary Catholic life. And that means you guys. It means everybody out there. It's not just what I think or what I'm interested in. Especially if you like today's podcast, make sure you write a review on our iTunes page. That's really important for getting the word out there, letting people know we exist, and bringing other people into the fold. We genuinely want to hear a broad range of views, not just ours, and we want them discussed. And we're quite prepared to have a ding-dong argument about something if that's if it's a really important thing. And there's lots of things to talk about which have differences of opinion legitimately, and people should be respected and listened to. So that's what we're about. Before we go, it's time for shout-outs. So, Renee, have you got a shout-out for anyone?
I have a shout-out for my friend and, dare I say, colleague, Matt Tan, who has an awesome blog, and it's called Awkward Asian Theologian. And he always has something really interesting to say. So I would encourage anyone who wants to see someone writing knowledgeably with a wonderful sense of humour about what it means to be Catholic and dealing with everyday life. I found one of his posts fairly recently really helpful in talking about the absurdity of life as something that we can actually embrace. That actually being Catholic is not a rosy picture all the time.
No.
And
it doesn't always make sense to us.
No, and he uses the Psalms to talk about this. So those Psalms where you have the psalmist saying, "Come on, God, what's going on? I don't understand what's going on. Where are you?" And I just found that really helpful.
The Psalms are quite vigorous about that.
Yeah.
They're really angry language, and we've tended to fluff them up a little bit in English translations, but they're really angry.
I know, another reason to learn Hebrew.
Indeed,
Thank you, Peter.
yes. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
You can count on it. We'll come back to that. On another note, I teach Hebrew. Ryan, shout-outs.
Yes, I want to shout out to all the Catholic creatives out there, especially here in Sydney. I know that I'm trying to form a Catholic community and business going forward. So anyone out there who I know and have invited, shout out to you. But if any artists or creatives out there want to be involved, I can't really reveal too much now, but if you want to be involved, please find me on Facebook.
Sure. That's your Facebook is?
Rian Galliott. So that's RIAN GALLIOTT.
We'll put that in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
Well, I'm on Facebook as well if you're interested. If you're not, that's fine. But if you're interested, I'm just simply Peter Holmes. That's with an L, as in Sherlock. And feel free to hit me up. It's much better, however, if you hit up this Catholic Life website and you'll get in contact with all of us and involved in this discussion. My shout out is to those people who think that Catholics are weird.
We love you.
We love you, and
We are you.
You're right. You're absolutely right. We're just the biggest bunch of weirdos. Some Protestants accuse me of going, "Oh, you're just going to a place where everything's perfect." No, Catholics have the biggest share of weirdos and nutcases and interesting people, and that's what makes it so beautiful. So if you're thinking Catholics are weird, you're right.
As James Joyce
shout
said,
out
here
to
comes
you.
everyone.
Yeah,
That's what the
here comes
Catholic Church
everyone.
said. Here comes everyone.
Or what was the book? Come on in, it's awful.
I don't know, but it rings true.
So next week we'll be talking about another topic. Hopefully it will be a topic about living life when Catholics have a bad name. We'll call it You Give Love a Bad Name, and talk about all those Catholics who give us a bad name or the bad press that we get and how to live with that, how much of it's genuinely earned, what we can do about it, that kind of thing. That's all for now. Thanks for listening to This Catholic Life.